the fun short bursts of one day events where a CEO would ask me to help his team discuss team effectiveness or just work with a startup team and have some fun. So this is the general 3 buckets of my portfolio. In reality, you know how it is in every client situation, you generate the proper blend. So any single project can have a little bit of decision making and workshops, a little bit of capability building and training and coaching, and a little bit of making things pleasant and engaging so that people can sustain the cognitive focus required to be on a virtual Zoom for 6 hours, right? So within the context of that, I say if this is my pie chart, my kind of the core of what I do, I wrap it around in gamification, which is just a way to take problem solving and engagement to the next level through applying things that normally we see in games to a business situation.
So tell me about that, how that plays out.
All right. So people are probably familiar with playing games. It's an innate human state to be playful. If you look at kids can come up with a game from out of nothing. Just the other day, my daughter was saying, I know how to sort out any boring situation is to make a game out of it, right? So if you think about what a game is, a game has some sort of a context and rules, maybe an objective. And then it has some mechanics of what you do, and then it has a feedback, right? So if you think about that and you apply it to business, there is a whole spectrum of possible applications. Let's just knock off the obvious ones on one end. On one end, you can just play standard games for pure fun, right? This is that's why a startup office would have the room with the shared spaces and with the games, because that would create opportunities for communication collusions, right? You can have games, play regular games just for fun, for team building. You know, this would be the equivalent of during COVID, people getting together on a Thursday night and playing a game online together just for the team building. You can actually use standard games explicitly for team building. So I have colleagues who put teams in Minecraft environment and give them small tasks, and then they debrief the team and say, okay, what can you learn about your collaboration style based on what happened within this game environment? These are all fine, right? I count this as pure fun, but it's good to acknowledge them, right? On the other end of the spectrum of sophistication, you would have, let's say, war game strategy games, in which, let's say, I'll give you a real client example, a pricing strategy project in an industry with a handful of players, perfect situation for a game theory play out, where we would prepare a war game strategy event with, in that case, we had about 25 different executives. They were split into different teams. Each team assumed the role of one of the players in the marketplace. We had briefed them with as much information as we could on the state and motivation and anything we could glean from public information on each of the players, so that they can act as close to how that player would act. And then we ran through a bunch of scenarios, macro scenarios, competitive scenarios, moves, contra moves. What would happen if we introduce this pricing? What would happen if they do this? What would happen if some other scenario occurs? And after, as we are going through the various scenarios and the game in multiple rounds, each of these teams had to make the choice that would be the most reasonable choice for that player. And then at the end, we debriefed, and it was very clear, just shifting perspective and putting yourself in the position of different players, different competitors, and playing through different scenarios. It was very beneficial, and it was immediately obvious what are the range of better choices for them. And that would be an example in the gamification space. This is called a desktop because it's not computerized. It is all tabletop, kind of tabletop game. But it does have the objective, it does have the mechanics, it does have the teams, etc.
Yeah, I always
So these are the two spectrums.
Yeah,
Yep.
I was going to say, I found in business school, in the few courses that we did some sort of role playing, that the learning was so more powerful emotionally in your gut. Like the lessons stayed with you just emotionally, even 15, 16 years later now. Like in negotiations class, that was all based on role playing, and you'd actually play out a real negotiation. It was like an exercise, but you would play out a negotiation with a partner. And often in Michael Feiner's class, high performance leadership, there was role playing where you'd role play with the professor or sometimes with another student on how you would coach someone or counsel someone. And just that role playing of putting yourself in someone's shoes and not just saying, oh, if I were this executive, this is what I would do, but actually playing that person and doing the role, it just lodges in your internal, in your gut somehow in a way that talking about it doesn't. So that sounds very powerful, what you do.
Yes, and so exactly. So role playing is its own genre, and this is again the end point of advancing the problem solving. The what should we do about this through games. The biggest and most pragmatic way of using gamification, where your listeners can steal some tricks from my bag right now, is in the space of engagement. So for me, any sort of interaction in a client situation is all about productive engagement. You want people to be engaged so that they're fully present and included and bring their talents to the table. But at the same time, it is not just about having good time together. You have to come up with whatever the outcome is. So hence the productive bit. And the gamification that consultants already use, for example, icebreakers. So anything that makes people interact with each other and builds trust quickly and establishes the positive foundation for a good interaction, that could be considered a gamification. So a simple game like, two lies and a truth, right? The standard introduction consulting game, that would be there. You could have side games. So I often, in longer events, I play some side game. It could be something silly as, how in meetings when we were younger, consultants will bring up the bingo game piece of paper with all the expected common phrases that a given client or a given partner would use. So whenever somebody say paradigm shift, you just kind of check off the paradigm shift and then you compare it. In a way, it's a way to keep people engaged and listen actually more carefully for these specific words. So that would be another way. You can absolutely use it. For example, by I like to just say with clients, okay, to keep us more engaged over the Zoom, what's one phrase that such and such frequently uses? They say up to the moon, recent example. And then the game is, okay, whenever we catch them saying up to the moon, everybody will just make a big gesture on screen, maybe do jazz hands or something like that. And it naturally brings a moment of levity and a crowd engagement. And there is this moment of interaction, especially now on screen, that happens. Beyond though icebreakers, what you mentioned with education, that's probably the biggest field of applying gamification. And anything that you want to transfer experientially would be there. So say, for example, I know that there are some different takes and possible conflict, different opinions. I may start with a simple activity where I gave them 60 seconds in silence or 30 seconds in silence. And then I ask them to show the little pieces of art that they've produced. Inevitably, we see very different perspectives, very different outcomes. And now in an easy debrief, you can broach the topic that it is expected that people with different perspectives will come up and will have a different read on the same situation, which is draw an elephant, right? So this is a 30-second experiential activity that immediately gets a point across that I think we as consultants intuitively do all the time. Let's see, what else? Well, if you're Amazon, they just announced this week that they're using some internal gamifications for their warehouse workers to keep them engaged and more productive, where based on how effectively you're stocking shelves and filling in boxes or whatever else they need to do, rather repetitive, boring things, they earn digital rewards such as they have probably avatars and pets and whatnot, and it is just for the engagement. I don't know how we can do that in consulting without the app, but I can tell you a very simple trick. I ask people to answer a question, and whoever answers the question, I just rename them and I put a little star in front of their name, which is the equivalent of a digital badge. And that works wonders as well. So there are many little tricks of how we can use gamification, things that we steal from games in the flow of facilitation to keep people engaged.
That's fascinating. Talk to me a bit about your capability building part of your practice, where you work with individuals and sometimes with consulting firms or independent consultants. What types of capabilities are you helping to build, and how do you go about that?
Yes. All right, let's talk about that. So I call it steal from the consulting playbook, because in reality, the skills that we develop as consultants are very transferable to any business situation. So while I was at McKinsey, I spent 10 years with McKinsey between 99 and 2009. On one hand, I was serving clients on strategy and change management and risk management, but my back page activities to help build the firm was actually leading trainings. So I was training our associates, I was training our managers, I was training our, facilitating leading ILW sessions, initial leadership workshops. So this is for people who are transitioning from management to junior partnership roles. So that would have the standard toolkit of problem solving, strategic thinking, how to manage a project, all the hardcore stuff. It will have skills around collaboration, communication, team management, creating buy-in, shareholder engagement, change management, all of the things that a consultant would need. Now, what happened with time was as I was training more and more cohorts of McKinsey consultants, they would view me as their trainer. So when they would have a client situation that would require a one-day academy for the frontline workers or something like that, they would bring me into structure, design, and deliver training for their clients. And that's how it became a bigger part of my client-facing portfolio as well. And then in 2009, when I broke off on my own, I noticed that clients basically are asking me to help transfer some of my skills to their own teams. So they'd say, hey, whenever we work with you, it feels so seamless. We try to do it without you to save on the budget, and then it doesn't go as seamless as we thought. Could you just teach our people to do whatever you're doing? And I started teaching what I know, which is exactly the same thing. So critical thinking, problem structuring, I call it strategic decision making. I call it professional superpowers, which goes beyond the hardcore skills and also has some success factors, mindsets, habits of thought that we have. And I've been doing it for the past, since 2009, that has been steadily growing. Subsequently, fellow McKinsey alums who have gone off to have their own boutique consultancies have asked me to come in and deliver like 2-3 day boot camps for all their people, especially when at the beginning of the summer, if they're taking a huge intern class of, let's say, 15 interns, and then they have 15 people internally that are full-time within their network. That's a good opportunity to have a level setting boot camp on. You can think about it as core consulting skills, but delivered in a more post McKinsey style, means applicable to clients who have not already benefit from 2 years of structured McKinsey training on the inside.
And how do you work those? Do you have sort of the whole thing designed around a case, similar to the way McKinsey does basic consulting readiness your first couple of weeks? Or tell me about the design and delivery of those sessions.
Yep. So there are two models. One is for large clients who have the budget and the interest. We design a program from scratch. So I would start by actually interviewing their leaders of what are your strategic objectives, what are the capabilities therefore that you need to develop, how do we develop them. That would basically involve sometimes developing internal cases, but more often actually selecting a slate of internal projects that we use as a case study, so real case study. So the value proposition for the clients becomes we build the skill set, at the same time we apply it to real-time relevant cases, real life. We give our upcoming leaders this scaffolded opportunity to develop their skills. We give them some visibility because, let's say, the teams get to present to the steering committee. We promise to fund one of the cases that has been especially well developed through the process or whatnot. So that is the custom tailored, whatever the client needs, trying to simultaneously build capabilities and advance the actual work of the client. It is usually a combination, the field and forum process, where you would have intensive events, series of intensive events which are more instructional and everybody comes together synchronously, and then periods of asynchronous work where teams work independently with coaching calls. I also have online app where it offers self-guided training and activities like that. So this is on one end. On the very other end is I have developed through all this client work as basically almost off-the-shelf modules, which are ready to be compiled with much lighter customization to people who want to just go for, let's be fast, nimble, efficient. Let's get 90% of the benefit with, 20% of the budget. And there the module is, we have 3 or 4 levels of intervention. One is kind of the interactive training, live, self-guided, that. The second level is a lab, which is we try to apply all these things, the concepts, to whatever the participants are working on right now. And then the next one would be a lab, within the training. And then the next one would be they actually go do something. So I'll give you a practical example. Let's say a client wants to upskill their folks on how to put together a deck, like very classic request for more junior folks. I want this person to be able to independently, figure out what the deck should be, go execute it, and give it to me in a client-ready form, right? So there is a little bit of how do you start? How do you do, let's start from the beginning. who's the audience for this deck, what's your objective, how do you do it, what's the content, what's your messages, what is the analytics. Now let's go through the process. Here's the storyline, here is the ghost, here is the various, the storyboard, the ghost, the various charts, how do you put it, how do you proof it, how do you rehearse it, all that stuff, kind of the theoretical. Then we say, okay, bring in your last PowerPoint presentation that you put together. Now let's compare how you went about it versus what we were just talking about. Immediately some light bulbs go off. Then it's like, okay, now let's go and retroactively redo it following these steps. Now it's something in the past. It is very safe because they are not on the hook for delivering it again. It is just a pure risk-free environment. We are playing with it. They get to peer coach each other on what works, what doesn't work. We do a few iterations because that's one of the biggest lessons in consulting. You iterate, and that's kind of the step 2. Step 3 would be, okay, now you have a real presentation coming up for next Monday. Let's work on that, right? And we repeat.
So, Aneta, it sounds like you have a variety of kind of modules that are ready to go off the shelf beyond the one of basic consulting skills. What other sorts of modules or topics are you ready to cover?
All right. So the topics would depend on what is the level of expertise of the target audience there and what are the skill sets that they need to develop. I generally have them on one end, it is the basic project management, problem solving, communication, collaboration, stakeholder engagement, all kind of the basic consulting skill set. Beyond that, for kind of the mid-tenure level folks, strategic decision making under risk and uncertainty. So this is more specific for decision making and strategy development. General kind of higher level communications, different types of communications, from communications for change management programs to public speaking. Lately, a lot of requests have been around leading distributed teams and facilitating online workshops. So how do you make online meetings and online workshops interactive? And then one thing that I always include a certain portion of, regardless of the other content, the more fundamental, I call them success factors, but these are the practices of thought and mindsets that help you be effective. So if you think about things like lifelong learning, how do you constantly learn and renew yourself? How do you coach yourself, if you wish? Or things like taking a top management perspective, having a bias for action, being explicit in your communications and your thought process, things like that, which are not specific skill training, but more a way of approaching situations that make consultants and professionals effective.
Got it. And that I know from watching you on LinkedIn that you have been experimenting or maybe moving forward and with video, and that you've been doing some interesting things there. Tell me a little bit about what you've been doing with videos.
Well, what have I been doing with videos? Okay, so one thing that I have noticed, just like you have noticed, is different people have different attention span depending on the day and the topic and their personal style. I wanted to experiment and see what would happen if you do both. And the use cases there were, I was actually a guest on a different podcast. So I posted a big podcast, which would be your long form. And then I selected just short highlights that I posted online. And that gives very short, very synthesized perspectives on a narrower part of the broader topic. So that is one. And then the other thing is, as I mentioned, I've been developing self-guided kind of nano learning app-based modules programs. So this is when people are learning at their own pace. They're on their mobile phone, or maybe they're on their iPad or on their laptop, and they follow a program. And basically the program is structured in very, very tiny bites. So you have a 15-minute session, which would have 5 mini steps in it. And maybe one of those steps would be watch this video about a topic. And around that, I've had to produce a bunch of small videos around a focused topic to just provide the content for the self-guided e-learning programs.
That's very cool. So Aneta, if listeners wanted to follow up and find out more about your work or follow up with you, where would you point them?
Please come to my website, www.aedeapartners.com, which I'm sure we will include in the show notes to save us all some grief in spelling. I am fairly active across social media. One thing I believe is that as independent professionals, we have to support each other and collectively elevate the field. So as part of that, I actually broadly share much of my tool bag and tricks. I have a newsletter in which I share information freely. I have monthly events where I mix and mingle my professional circles, and everybody's invited to join them. Occasionally, I give public seminars, depending on what's going on the client front. And I'm always available to have a conversation.
Fantastic. Well, we will include those links in the show notes. Aneta, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much, Will.